The year is 945. In the great hall of Kiev, a woman stands over the bodies of 20 men. Their blood pools on the wooden floor, mixing with spilled wine and shattered pottery. Outside, her guards are already digging the pit, deep, wide enough for all of them. The woman's name is Olga. She is 35 years old, and she has just become the most powerful ruler in all of Rus, not through inheritance, not through marriage, but through something far more terrifying. Through a promise she made to herself 3 days ago, standing over her husband's mutilated corpse. A promise that would transform her from a grieving widow into the architect of one of history's most methodical, most creative, most absolutely merciless campaigns of vengeance ever recorded. What she's about to do will make hardened warriors wake screaming in the night. It will turn an entire city into ash. It will echo through the chronicles of Rus for 1,000 years. And it will earn her something that seems impossible: sainthood. How does a woman who burns thousands of people alive become a saint? What kind of revenge could be so complete, so perfectly executed, that it transforms from atrocity into legend? And why has the Orthodox Church spent a millennium trying to reconcile the warrior queen who bathed the nation in blood with the pious grandmother they canonized? This is the story of Saint Olga of Kiev. The story of how one woman's grief became a kingdom's nightmare. The story of vengeance so absolute that even God himself apparently approved. To understand Olga, to truly grasp the magnitude of what she's about to unleash, we need to go back. Back before the blood. Back before the burning. Back to a world where the word Russia doesn't even exist yet, where Viking warriors are carving kingdoms from the wilderness, and where a young woman from Pskov is about to marry into a dynasty that will shape Eastern Europe for centuries. The land that will one day be called Russia is, in the early 10th century, a patchwork of competing powers. Slavic tribes, Finno-Ugric peoples, and Scandinavian raiders all vie for control of the river routes that connect the Baltic Sea to the Byzantine Empire. These rivers, the Volga, the Dnieper, the Volkhov, are highways of commerce. Furs and slaves flow south, silver and silk flow north. Whoever controls these routes controls unimaginable wealth. Into this world come the Varangians. History will later call them Vikings, but here in the east they're known as the Rus, Swedish warriors and traders who have pushed down from Scandinavia, establishing fortified settlements along the river systems. They're not colonizers in the traditional sense. They're a military elite who rule over Slavic populations, extracting tribute and controlling trade. The most powerful of these Varangian settlements is Kiev. Perched on the bluffs above the Dnieper River, Kiev commands the trade route between the Baltic and Constantinople. By the early 10th century, it's the center of what chroniclers are beginning to call Kievan Rus, a loose confederation of territories united under Varangian military leadership, but increasingly influenced by Slavic culture, Byzantine diplomacy, and the ever-present threat of steppe nomads from the east. The ruler of Kiev in 912 is a man named Oleg. He's a warrior chieftain who has spent decades consolidating power, subduing rival tribes, and establishing Kiev as the premier power in the region. When Oleg dies around 913, the throne passes to Igor, who may or may not be Oleg's son. The chronicles are frustratingly vague on the exact relationships. What matters is that Igor inherits a kingdom, and with it, all the challenges of maintaining power in a world where strength is the only currency that matters. Igor needs allies. He needs warriors. He needs legitimacy, and in the world of 10th century Eastern Europe, all of these things can be acquired through strategic marriage. Around 903, Igor marries a woman named Olga. The chronicles tell us almost nothing about Olga's early life, which is itself revealing. In a world where royal genealogies are meticulously recorded, where bloodlines determine legitimacy, Olga appears suddenly in the historical record with no documented family, no established lineage, no noble ancestry worth mentioning. The primary chronicle, our main source for early Rus history, compiled centuries later by Orthodox monks, says only that Olga came from Pskov, a northern city, and that she was brought to Igor as a bride. Some later traditions claim she was of Varangian descent, others suggest she was Slavic. A few romantic legends added centuries after the fact describe Igor meeting her while hunting, being impressed by her intelligence, and choosing her despite her common birth. What's clear is this: Olga was not born into power, she married into it, and that distinction will prove crucial, because Olga will never take power for granted. She understands, in a way that those born to rule often don't, that authority must be claimed, defended, and ruthlessly maintained. Igor and Olga rule Kiev together for over 30 years. They have at least one son, Sviatoslav, born around 942. During these decades, Igor continues the work of consolidating Rus territory. He leads military campaigns against neighboring tribes. He negotiates trade agreements with the Byzantine Empire. He extracts tribute from conquered peoples. He fights wars against the Pechenegs, nomadic warriors from the steppes who constantly threaten the southern borders of Rus territory. It's not a peaceful reign. It's not a glorious reign. It's the grinding, violent work of state-building in a world where diplomacy happens at spear point, and where last year's alliance partner is this year's enemy. But it's effective. By the 940s, Kievan Rus is a power that neighboring kingdoms must respect, and through it all, Olga is there, not as a passive consort, not as a decorative royal wife. The chronicles, sparse as they are, suggest she was involved in governance, in decision-making, in the administration of Igor's territories. She was learning, watching, understanding how power works, understanding its strengths, and understanding its vulnerabilities. The Drevlians are a Slavic tribe living in the forests west of Kiev. Their territory is valuable, rich in furs and timber, and strategically positioned along trade routes. They've been subjugated by Kiev for decades, forced to pay annual tribute to Igor. They hate it. Every year when Igor's tribute collectors arrive, demanding furs and honey and slaves, the resentment grows deeper. By 945, the Drevlians have had enough. Igor, growing older, perhaps growing greedy, perhaps simply overestimating his strength, decides to extract additional tribute from the Drevlians. He's already collected the regular annual payment, but he wants more. He returns to Drevlian territory with a small retinue, expecting that his reputation and authority will be enough to intimidate them into compliance. It's a catastrophic miscalculation. The Drevlian prince, a man named Mal, sees an opportunity. Igor has separated himself from his main army. He's vulnerable, and the Drevlians are tired of being exploited by Kiev. The primary chronicle describes what happens next with brutal simplicity. The Drevlians capture Igor. They bend 2 trees to the ground, tie Igor's legs to them, and release the trees. Grand Prince of Kiev, ruler of the Rus, is torn in half. His body, or what remains of it, is left in the forest as a message. The Drevlians are no longer Kiev's subjects. They are free, and anyone who challenges them will share Igor's fate. News of Igor's death reaches Kiev within days, and with it comes terror, because everyone in Kiev understands what this means. The assassination of a ruler isn't just a personal tragedy, it's an existential threat to the entire political structure. If the Drevlians can kill Igor with impunity, other tributary tribes will rebel. If Kiev doesn't respond with overwhelming force, the careful system of tribute and subordination that Igor spent decades building will collapse. Rival princes will sense weakness. The Pechenegs will raid. The Byzantine Empire will renegotiate treaties from a position of strength. Everything could unravel, but responding is complicated because Kiev doesn't have a ruler. Igor is dead. His son Sviatoslav is approximately 3 years old. A child cannot lead armies. A child cannot command respect. A child cannot hold together a kingdom built on military might and personal authority. The boyars, the noble warriors who advise the prince and command troops, convene in emergency council. They need someone to serve as regent until Sviatoslav comes of age. Someone who can make decisions. Someone who can lead. Someone who commands enough respect that the soldiers will follow them. The choice, when they make it, is both obvious and unprecedented. Olga, she's the widow of the murdered prince. She's the mother of the heir. She's been involved in governance for decades. She knows the court, she knows the warriors, she knows the system. More importantly, and this is crucial, she has the strongest personal motivation to avenge Igor's death. Blood feuds are sacred obligations in Rus culture. A widow must seek vengeance for her husband. It's not optional, it's expected. What no one expects is how Olga will interpret that obligation. Standing in the great hall of Kiev, surrounded by warriors who are watching to see if she'll break, if she'll weep, if she'll show weakness, Olga makes her first decision as regent. She accepts the Drevlian embassy, because here's what the Drevlians have done in their arrogance. They've decided that killing Igor isn't enough. They want to prevent Kiev from retaliating by neutralizing Olga politically. So Prince Mal, the same man who ordered Igor's execution, sends an embassy to Kiev with a proposal. He wants to marry Olga. Think about the audacity. The man who ordered your husband torn in half now wants to marry you. He's offering you a choice: become his wife and merge the Drevlian and Kievan territories under his rule, or face war as a widow with a child heir and no army of your own. It's a brilliant political move. It neutralizes the threat of vengeance by turning the victim into an ally. It prevents civil war. It solves the succession crisis. It's practical, pragmatic, and completely in line with how royal marriages function in this era. The Drevlian embassy, 20 distinguished men representing Prince Mal's court, arrives in Kiev expecting negotiation. Perhaps they expect Olga to be angry. Perhaps they expect her to demand concessions. But they expect her to be rational. They expect her to recognize that marriage to Mal is the best outcome available to her. Olga receives them graciously. She listens to their proposal. She asks questions about Prince Mal's territories, his wealth, his plans for governing the combined kingdom. She appears thoughtful, considering, and then she tells them that such an important decision requires proper ceremony. These aren't mere messengers. These are representatives of a prince who may become her husband. They deserve honors befitting their status. Tomorrow, she tells them, she will send her own retainers to escort them to the palace. They will be carried in their boat, as great men should be, elevated above the common people, demonstrated proper respect. The Drevlians, flattered and relieved that Olga seems amenable to negotiation, retire to their quarters to wait for the ceremony. That night, Olga's servants begin digging. The pit is deep, deeper than a grave needs to be, deeper than seems practical. The servants digging it don't ask questions. They've learned over the years that Olga doesn't explain herself, and those who demand explanations tend to find themselves on the wrong end of her decisions. By dawn, the pit is finished, right in the courtyard of the palace. Impossible to miss. And then they wait. The Drevlian embassy wakes to find Kiev's finest warriors assembled outside their quarters. The warriors explain that Princess Olga has commanded that the Drevlian nobles be honored with a ceremonial procession. They will be carried in their own boat, elevated high, transported through the city, so everyone can see these distinguished guests who may soon unite the Drevlian and Rus peoples. It's unusual, certainly, but it's also flattering. The Drevlians settle into their boat, and Kiev's warriors hoist it onto their shoulders. The procession begins, moving through Kiev's streets toward the palace. Citizens gather to watch. The Drevlians wave, enjoying the attention, interpreting it as a sign that Olga's people are already accepting the inevitable political marriage. They're still waving when the procession reaches the courtyard. They're still smiling when they see the pit, and then they're falling. The warriors tilt the boat, dumping all 20 Drevlian nobles into the hole. The men land hard, some breaking bones in the fall, others landing on top of their companions. They're shouting now, confused, angry, demanding to know what's happening. Olga appears at the edge of the pit. She looks down at them. 20 men who came to her city representing the murder of her husband. 20 men who thought she would accept subjugation dressed up as marriage. The primary chronicle records what she says to them, though the exact words are certainly dramatized by later chroniclers. The sentiment, though, is clear. Is this honor to your taste? The Drevlians are screaming now. Some are begging. Some are threatening. Some are offering ransom, promising wealth, swearing that Prince Mal didn't authorize this approach, that there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Olga watches them for a long moment, and then she nods to her servants. They begin filling in the pit, burying the Drevlians alive. The earth falls on them in shovelfuls. The screaming becomes muffled, then quieter, then silent. By midday, the courtyard shows no sign of what happened except for a patch of freshly turned earth. Olga returns to the great hall and composes a message to Prince Mal. She thanks him for his generous proposal. She explains that she was deeply honored by the quality of the men he sent as his representatives. In fact, she was so impressed that she wishes to accept his proposal, but only if he will do her the honor of sending his very best men, his most distinguished nobles, his closest advisors. Surely, she writes, a marriage between the Drevlian prince and the Rus princess deserves to be negotiated by the finest men both kingdoms can provide. She's baiting the trap, and Prince Mal walks right into it. He's encouraged by Olga's response. He interprets it as vanity. She wants to be courted by more important men. She wants to feel valued. This is normal. This is expected. He has no idea what happened to his first embassy, because none of them returned, and in a world without instant communication, their silence could mean anything. Perhaps they're still in Kiev finalizing arrangements. Perhaps they're traveling to other cities to build support for the marriage. Mal assumes everything is proceeding according to plan. He assembles his most important nobles, his closest advisors, men who have served his family for generations, men whose wisdom and experience make them invaluable. He sends them to Kiev with instructions to formalize the marriage agreement. This embassy is even larger than the first. The chronicles suggest dozens of men, possibly as many as 50. They arrive in Kiev expecting welcome and negotiation. They're tired from the journey. They ask Olga's servants if they might use the bathhouses to clean themselves before the formal reception. Of course, Olga's servants tell them, "We prepared the bathhouses specifically for your arrival. Please, refresh yourselves. Take as long as you need." The Drevlians enter the bathhouses gratefully. In Rus culture, bathhouses are sacred spaces. They're where you cleanse yourself before important ceremonies. They're where you relax after long journeys. They're heated wooden structures filled with steam, peaceful and welcoming. The Drevlians settle in, enjoying the heat, washing away weeks of travel grime. They're probably discussing strategy, planning how to negotiate with Olga, confident that this marriage will cement Drevlian dominance over Kiev. They don't notice when Olga's servants bar the doors from the outside. They don't notice until they smell the smoke. Olga has ordered the bathhouses set on fire, with the Drevlians locked inside. The building is wood, dry wood. The flames spread fast. The Drevlians realize what's happening and rush to the doors. They're locked. They pound on the walls, on the windows, screaming for help. Some try to break through the wooden planks. Others are already succumbing to smoke inhalation. Outside, Kiev's citizens gather to watch. Some are horrified. Some are horrified. All understand the message. This is what happens to those who kill the Prince of Kiev. This is what happens to those who think a widow can be intimidated or manipulated. This is what happens when you underestimate Olga. The screaming eventually stops. The bathhouses burn to ash. And Olga sends another message to Prince Mal. She's coming to Drevlian territory. She wants to hold a funeral feast at her husband's grave, as is traditional. She wants to mourn Igor properly before moving forward with her new life as Mal's wife. Surely, she writes, Prince Mal will understand a widow's need to honor the dead before embracing the future. Prince Mal should be suspicious by now. 2 embassies have vanished. But remember, communication is slow. He may not even know they're missing. And Olga's request seems reasonable, even touching. She wants to honor Igor before marrying his killer. It shows respect for tradition. It demonstrates that she's accepted the political reality. Mal agrees. He makes a catastrophic mistake. Olga travels to Drevlian territory with a small retinue. She's not bringing an army. She's bringing servants, cooks, brewers, everything necessary for a proper funeral feast. Prince Mal greets her personally, offering condolences for Igor's death, while barely concealing his satisfaction that the political situation is resolving so smoothly. Olga asks to be taken to her husband's grave. Mal escorts her personally. The grave is in the forest where Igor died, marked by a simple mound of earth. Olga kneels beside it. She weeps. She tears at her clothes. She performs all the rituals of grief that Rus culture demands, and then she begins preparing the feast. Funeral feasts in Rus culture are elaborate affairs. They're not somber, they're celebrations of the deceased's life. There's food, music, storytelling, and most importantly, there's mead. Rivers of mead. Drinking at a funeral feast isn't just accepted, it's required. You drink to honor the dead. You drink to celebrate their memory. You drink until you can barely stand. Olga's servants have brought barrels of mead, the finest mead, specially prepared. They've been brewing it for weeks. The Drevlians gather for the feast, thousands of them. Warriors, nobles, common people. Everyone who wants to see the widow of the man they killed, everyone who's curious about this marriage that will elevate their prince to rule both Drevlian and Rus territories. The feast begins. Olga's servants pour the mead freely. The Drevlians drink, and drink, and drink. The mead is exceptional, sweet and strong. The kind of mead you can't stop drinking once you start. The Drevlians praise Olga's generosity. They toast to Igor's memory. They toast to the coming marriage. They toast to the unification of their peoples. Olga doesn't drink. She watches, waiting. By nightfall, the Drevlians are catastrophically drunk. Thousands of warriors who can barely stand, nobles who've passed out in the grass, common people singing incoherently. It's exactly what Olga planned for. She signals her retinue, and they draw their weapons. What follows isn't a battle, it's a massacre. Olga's small retinue, sober and armed, moves through the feast, systematically cutting down drunk, defenseless Drevlians. 5,000 people die that night according to the chronicles. 5,000 people who came to a funeral feast and found their own deaths instead. The killing continues until dawn. By morning, the forest is carpeted with bodies. The survivors, those who manage to flee into the darkness, scatter to their villages carrying tales of horror. The widow of Kiev has revealed herself to be something far worse than anyone imagined. Prince Mal somehow survives the massacre. Perhaps he left early, perhaps he wasn't at the feast. The chronicles don't specify, but he's alive, and he understands now what he's dealing with. This isn't a political marriage. This isn't a negotiation. This is annihilation. The Drevlians retreat to their capital city, Iskorosten. It's a fortified settlement, protected by wooden walls. They bar the gates. They man the ramparts. They prepare for siege, because they know Olga is coming. And she is. But not immediately. Because Olga understands something fundamental about power. Vengeance isn't just about killing your enemies. It's about making sure everyone knows what happens to those who challenge you. It's about sending a message so clear, so unambiguous, that no one will ever dare to repeat the offense. The massacre at the funeral feast has accomplished something crucial. It's demonstrated that Olga is not bound by conventional rules of hospitality or diplomacy. It's shown that she's willing to use any method, any deception, to destroy those who wronged her. But it's not enough. The Drevlians still have their capital. They still have Prince Mal. They can still claim some measure of defiance. Olga needs to erase that defiance completely. She needs to make an example so devastating that the memory of it will echo through generations. She needs to destroy not just the Drevlian leadership, but the very idea that Kiev can be challenged. So she returns to Kiev. She gathers an army, a real army this time, thousands of warriors, and in the summer of 946 she marches on Iskorosten. The siege of Iskorosten begins in early summer. Olga's forces surround the city completely. No one enters, no one leaves. The Drevlians, trapped inside their walls, wait for the assault. It doesn't come. Weeks pass. Olga's army remains in position, but they don't attack. They don't even harass the defenders. They just wait. The Drevlians, expecting conventional siege warfare, battering rams, escalades, starvation tactics, don't understand what Olga's doing. Inside Iskorosten, the mood shifts from fear to confusion to a strange kind of hope. Maybe Olga doesn't have the resources for a prolonged siege. Maybe her army will give up and go home. Maybe they can outlast her. A delegation of Drevlian elders approaches the walls under a flag of truce. They call down to Olga's forces. They want to negotiate. What does the Princess of Kiev want? What tribute will satisfy her? They're willing to pay. Furs, honey, whatever she demands. Just end the siege. Olga herself responds. The chronicles record her words, and whether they're precisely accurate or dramatized by later writers, they capture the psychological warfare she's waging. She tells the Drevlians that she's already had her vengeance. 3 times over, the embassy buried alive, the nobles burned in the bathhouse, the massacre at the funeral feast. Her anger is satisfied. She doesn't want tribute. She doesn't want wealth. She wants something simple, something the Drevlians can surely provide without hardship. She wants 3 sparrows and 3 pigeons from each household in the city. The Drevlians are stunned. This is the demand? Birds? After months of siege, after the slaughter of thousands, Olga wants birds. They discuss it frantically. It has to be a trick. But what kind of trick? How can sparrows and pigeons possibly be weaponized? They're just birds. Common birds. Every household has them. It's such a small thing to ask. The Drevlian elders decide to accept. They're so relieved that Olga's demands are so modest that they don't think carefully about why she wants birds in the first place. They gather the sparrows and pigeons, thousands of birds. They bring them to the walls in cages and hand them over to Olga's forces. Olga accepts them graciously. She thanks the Drevlians for their cooperation. She promises that the siege will end shortly. She's telling the truth, just not in the way they think. That night, Olga's servants attach small pieces of cloth to each bird. The cloth is soaked in sulfur. They tie the cloth to the bird's legs and tails with thread, and then they set the cloth on fire and release the birds. The birds, panicked and in pain, do exactly what Olga knew they would. They fly home, back to the city, back to the households where they were captured, back to their nests in the thatched roofs and wooden eaves of Iskorosten. Thousands of burning birds descending on a city built entirely of wood and thatch. Iskorosten erupts in flames, not in one place, not in a way that can be fought or contained. Everywhere, simultaneously, every neighborhood, every street, the fires spread faster than the Drevlians can respond. They're trying to put out blazes in their homes while new fires erupt in their neighbors' houses. The wooden walls catch fire. The wooden watchtowers become torches. Panic consumes the city as thoroughly as the flames. People are running in every direction, trying to save their families, their possessions, their lives. The gates, which the Drevlians kept barred against Olga's army, now trap them inside an inferno. Those who manage to break through the gates flee directly into Olga's waiting forces. She's prepared for this. Her warriors have orders. Some Drevlians are killed immediately. Others are captured. The able-bodied men and women are enslaved. The elderly and the children, those who can't work or serve, are allowed to flee into the forest. Prince Marl's fate is not recorded. The chronicles don't tell us if he died in the flames, if he was captured and executed, or if he escaped. His absence from the historical record after Iskorosten's destruction is probably intentional. Olga has erased him so completely that even his death doesn't merit documentation. By morning, Iskorosten is gone, the capital of the Drevlian people. The city that thought itself safe behind walls has been reduced to ash and charred timbers. Thousands are dead, thousands more enslaved. The survivors are scattered, broken, traumatized. The Drevlian people as a distinct political entity cease to exist. Their lands are absorbed into Kievan Rus. Their tribute, which they killed Igor to escape paying, now flows to Olga, and it will flow to her successors for generations. The Drevlians will never again threaten Kiev. They will never again assert independence. They have been annihilated as a lesson. Olga returns to Kiev in triumph. She has avenged her husband. She has avenged her husband. She has secured her son's inheritance. She has demonstrated to every tributary tribe, every neighboring prince, every potential rival, that Kiev under her regency is not to be trifled with. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. This isn't the end of Olga's reign. This is the beginning. In the years following the destruction of Iskorosten, something extraordinary happens. Olga, the woman who buried men alive, who burned nobles in bathhouses, who orchestrated a massacre at a funeral feast, who turned an entire city into an inferno, begins to transform, not into something softer, not into something gentler, but into something more terrifying, a competent administrator, an effective ruler, a political genius who understands that sustained power requires more than spectacular violence. The vengeance against the Drevlians accomplished something crucial. It established Olga's authority absolutely. No tributary tribe will rebel now. No rival prince will test her. The story of what happened to the Drevlians spreads across Rus territories and beyond. Traders carry the tale to Scandinavia and Byzantium. Diplomats whisper about it in foreign courts. The widow of Kiev who destroyed an entire people becomes legendary. But legends don't collect taxes. Legends don't maintain trade routes. Legends don't build the administrative infrastructure necessary to transform a collection of conquered territories into a functioning state. For that you need something more practical. You need bureaucracy. Olga gets to work. One of her first acts after returning from the Drevlian campaign is to completely reorganize how tribute is collected throughout Rus territories. The old system, the one Igor used, was chaotic and exploitative. The prince would personally lead expeditions to tributary territories, demanding whatever he felt like. Taking whatever he could carry. It was random, unpredictable, and it created exactly the kind of resentment that got Igor killed. Olga replaces this with something revolutionary for 10th century Eastern Europe. She establishes fixed tribute amounts for each territory. She creates regular collection schedules. She builds trading posts and administrative centers called pogosti throughout Rus lands. These pogosti serve as centralized locations where tribute is delivered, stored, and processed. No more armed expeditions demanding arbitrary amounts. No more local princes wondering if this year's tribute collector will ask for furs or gold or slaves or all three. The system is brilliant in its simplicity. Each territory knows exactly what it owes. Each territory knows exactly when payment is due. Each territory has a specific location to deliver tribute. It's predictable. It's organized. It removes the personal confrontation that breeds rebellion. And crucially, it's more efficient. Olga extracts more wealth from tributary territories than Igor ever did, but she does it in a way that feels less like extortion and more like taxation. This is state building, real state building. Olga is transforming Kievan Rus from a Viking raiding base that happens to control some territory into an actual governmental structure with standardized procedures and administrative institutions. Future princes will inherit not just power, but systems. Systems that outlast individual rulers. Systems that make the state stronger than any single person. But Olga understands that economic reform alone isn't enough. She needs diplomatic legitimacy. She needs Kievan Rus to be recognized as an equal by the great powers of the medieval world. And in the 10th century, there's only one power that truly matters in this part of the world: Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire, the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East, is the wealthiest, most sophisticated, most powerful state in Christendom. Constantinople is the largest city in Europe. Its emperor commands armies that dwarf anything the Rus can field. Its cultural and religious influence radiates across the Orthodox Christian world. Every ruler from the Baltic to the Black Sea wants Byzantine recognition, Byzantine trade agreements, Byzantine prestige. Olga decides to go to Constantinople herself, not as a supplicant, not as a barbarian seeking scraps from the imperial table, but as an equal, as a ruling princess representing a powerful state. The exact date of Olga's visit to Constantinople is disputed. Most historians place it around 957, roughly 12 years after Igor's death. She travels with a large retinue, bringing gifts worthy of an imperial court. Furs, amber, slaves, all the wealth of the northern forests packaged for Byzantine tastes. Emperor Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus, receives her personally. This is significant. The Byzantine emperor doesn't personally receive every foreign dignitary who shows up in Constantinople. Most are handled by court officials. The fact that Constantine meets with Olga directly indicates that Byzantium takes Kievan Rus seriously as a regional power. The chronicles record that Constantine was impressed by Olga, impressed by her intelligence, her political acumen, her understanding of court protocol. There are later legends, almost certainly fictional, that suggest Constantine wanted to marry Olga and that she outwitted him through clever wordplay. These stories are romantic fabrications. Constantine was already married. The legends exist because later chroniclers couldn't imagine a powerful man meeting a powerful woman without desire entering the equation. What actually happens during Olga's visit is more interesting than romance. She converts to Christianity. This is enormous. Kievan Rus at this point is pagan. The Rus worship Norse and Slavic gods. Thor, Perun, a complex pantheon of deities associated with war, thunder, fertility, the harvest. Christianity exists in Rus territories, brought by traders and prisoners and the occasional missionary, but it's a minority faith. The ruling dynasty is firmly pagan. Olga's conversion changes this calculus. By accepting baptism, she's not just embracing a new personal faith, she's making a political statement. She's aligning Kievan Rus with the Byzantine sphere of influence. She's opening channels for deeper diplomatic and economic integration with the most powerful Christian empire in the world. The Byzantine court sponsors her baptism personally. Emperor Constantine serves as her godfather. This creates a symbolic family relationship between the Byzantine emperor and the Rus princess. In medieval Christian politics, such spiritual kinship carries real political weight. It means Olga can call on Byzantine support. It means trade agreements become easier to negotiate. It means Kievan Rus is no longer a distant barbarian territory, but a fellow Christian nation. Olga returns to Kiev with priests, religious texts, icons, and all the trappings of Byzantine Christianity. She builds churches. She encourages conversion. She presents Christianity not as a foreign imposition, but as a sophisticated upgrade to primitive paganism. Look, she tells her people, look at Byzantium's wealth, its power, its culture. This is what Christianity can bring us. But here's where things get complicated. Olga's son, Sviatoslav, now in his 20s and coming into his own as a warrior, refuses to convert. Sviatoslav is everything Olga is not. Where she's calculating, he's impulsive. Where she's diplomatic, he's confrontational. Where she builds administrative systems, he dreams of conquest. He's a throwback to the old Varangian raider culture. He lives like a nomad warrior, sleeping on the ground wrapped in his cloak, eating dried meat cooked over open fires. He's more comfortable on campaign than in Kiev's halls. And he's popular. The warriors love him. He's one of them. He fights alongside them, shares their hardships, leads from the front. He's the kind of prince that Viking warriors follow into impossible odds because they believe he's blessed by the gods. Their gods. The old gods, not this new Christian god his mother has embraced. Sviatoslav sees Christianity as Byzantine imperialism. He sees his mother's conversion as submission. He refuses to be baptized. He refuses to allow Christianity to become Rus's official faith. When Olga presses him, he tells her bluntly that his warriors would mock him if he converted, that he would lose their respect, that he cannot abandon the gods who have brought him victory. Olga cannot force him. Sviatoslav is too powerful, too popular, too essential to Rus military strength. She has to accept that her Christian vision for Kievan Rus will not be realized during her regency. But she plants seeds. She continues building churches. She continues supporting Christian communities. She continues maintaining relationships with Byzantium. She's playing a longer game. Sviatoslav may resist, but his children might not. His grandchildren might not. Christianity will come to rest eventually, Olga is ensuring that when it does, the infrastructure will already exist. In the meantime, she has a kingdom to run. And Sviatoslav, restless and ambitious, gives her plenty to deal with. Sviatoslav begins leading military campaigns in the late 950s. He's extraordinarily successful. He conquers the Vyatichi, a Slavic tribe that had been paying tribute to the Khazars instead of to Kiev. He destroys Khazar power in the Volga region, dealing a death blow to a kingdom that had dominated the steppe for centuries. He campaigns in the Caucasus. He fights in Bulgaria. Olga watches her son turn Kievan Rus into a military powerhouse. Territory expands, tribute pours in. Rus warriors gain a fearsome reputation. Sviatoslav is doing exactly what a Viking prince should do. He's conquering, but he's also never in Kiev. He's always on campaign, always chasing the next victory, always pushing further. And someone needs to actually govern the territories he's conquering. Someone needs to collect the tribute. Someone needs to maintain order. Someone needs to ensure that while Sviatoslav is off fighting Byzantines in Bulgaria, the state doesn't collapse into chaos. That someone is Olga. While Sviatoslav wages war, Olga wages peace. She administers, she adjudicates disputes, she manages the treasury, she conducts diplomacy. She ensures that the tribute keeps flowing, that the trade routes remain secure, that the bureaucracy she's built continues functioning. It's a partnership, though neither of them would call it that. Sviatoslav provides military might and territorial expansion. Olga provides stability and governance. Together they're making Kievan Rus into a major power, but it can't last. Sviatoslav is pushing too far, fighting too many enemies, stretching Rus military resources too thin. And in 968, his campaigns in Bulgaria bring him into direct conflict with Byzantium. This is a disaster. Olga has spent years cultivating the Byzantine relationship. She's built diplomatic channels. She's positioned Kievan Rus as a Byzantine ally, and now her son is invading Byzantine territory, threatening Byzantine interests, undoing everything she's worked for. The Byzantine emperor sends armies against Sviatoslav. The Pechenegs, sensing opportunity, raid Rus territories while Sviatoslav's forces are committed in Bulgaria. And then, in 968, the Pechenegs besiege Kiev itself. Olga is in the city when the siege begins. She's in her 60s now, an extraordinary age for the medieval world. She's been ruling in one capacity or another for over 20 years, and now enemy forces surround her capital, and her son is hundreds of miles away fighting someone else's war. The siege is desperate, food runs short, the Pechenegs assault the walls repeatedly. Kiev's defenders, led by Olga's appointees, hold firm, but they're outnumbered and running out of supplies. They send messengers to Sviatoslav begging him to return and save the city. Sviatoslav eventually breaks off his Bulgarian campaign and races back to Kiev. His army arrives just in time. They shatter the Pecheneg siege. Kiev is saved. But Sviatoslav is furious with his mother, not for failing to defend the city, for being there in the first place. He tells Olga that Kiev is too exposed, too vulnerable. He wants to move the capital. He's been spending time in Pereyaslawets on the Danube during his Bulgarian campaigns, and he loves it. It's centrally located for his military ambitions. It gives him access to both Byzantine and Balkan territories. He wants to rule from there, not from Kiev. Olga refuses to let him. She argues, she pleads, she uses every bit of political leverage she's accumulated over 2 decades. Kiev is the heart of Rus. Kiev is where the administrative systems are based. Kiev is home. She wins this argument, but it costs her everything she has left. The effort of the siege, the stress of the Pecheneg assault, the confrontation with Sviatoslav, all of it drains whatever remaining vitality she possesses. In 969, Olga falls ill. The chronicles don't specify the illness. In a 60-year-old woman who has lived through decades of political intrigue, warfare, and stress, it could be anything. What matters is that she knows she's dying. She calls for a Christian priest. She makes confession. She receives last rites according to Christian custom. And then she makes Sviatoslav promise something. She makes him promise that when she dies she will receive a Christian burial. No pagan funeral pyre, no sacrifice of slaves and horses. A Christian burial in the church she built. Sviatoslav, who has resisted Christianity his entire life, agrees it's the last thing he can give his mother, the last acknowledgement of everything she accomplished. Olga dies in 969. She's buried in a Christian ceremony in Kiev. It's a small Christian funeral in a pagan city, attended by the few Christians in Kiev and by warriors who honor her despite not sharing her faith. Sviatoslav mourns, but he doesn't convert, he won't convert. He'll die fighting Pechenegs just 3 years later, still worshipping the old gods, still living like a nomad warrior, still refusing to embrace his mother's vision of a Christian Rus. But Olga's vision doesn't die with her, because Sviatoslav has 3 sons, and one of them, Vladimir, will remember his grandmother's teachings. Vladimir will convert to Christianity in 988, nearly 20 years after Olga's death. He'll make Christianity the official religion of Kievan Rus. He'll build churches across the land. He'll position Rus within the Byzantine cultural sphere exactly as Olga envisioned. And Vladimir will be canonized as a saint. Saint Vladimir, the man who brought Christianity to Rus. But before Vladimir, the church canonizes someone else. Someone whose path to sainthood is infinitely more complicated. Someone who burned cities and buried men alive and orchestrated massacres. They canonize Olga. Here's the problem with Saint Olga, and it's a problem the Orthodox Church has been grappling with for over 1,000 years. How do you reconcile the woman who turned Iskorosten into an inferno with a pious grandmother who brought Christianity to Rus? How do you square systematic vengeance with spiritual devotion? How do you canonize someone whose most famous acts involved creative mass murder? The Church's answer is fascinating, tortured, and reveals everything about how history gets sanitized, how legends get rewritten, and how inconvenient truths get buried under layers of hagiography. Olga is canonized sometime in the 13th century, roughly 300 years after her death. The exact date is unclear because the process of canonization in the Orthodox Church at this time is informal. There's no papal decree, no official investigation. Saints are recognized through popular veneration that the Church eventually acknowledges, and people did venerate Olga. Christian communities in Rus territories remembered her as the first ruler to embrace Christianity. They remembered her building churches. They remembered her journey to Constantinople. They remembered her raising her grandson Vladimir, who would eventually convert all of Rus. They conveniently de-emphasized the burning and the burying in the massacre. The official hagiographies, the saints' lives written to celebrate her holiness, perform remarkable narrative gymnastics. They acknowledge the vengeance against the Drevlians because it's too well known to ignore, but they frame it very carefully. First, they emphasize that the Drevlians started it. Igor's murder was treacherous, brutal, an offense against the natural order. A widow has the right, even the obligation, to seek vengeance for her husband's death. This is sacred duty. The Drevlians violated hospitality, violated tribute obligations, violated every code of honor. They deserved punishment. Second, they present Olga's vengeance as measured and proportional. Yes, she killed thousands. But the Drevlians killed God's anointed prince. Yes, she used deception. But the Drevlians used treachery first. Yes, she burned Iskorosten. But she offered them multiple chances to submit peacefully. Every escalation is framed as the Drevlians' choice. Every atrocity is presented as reluctant necessity. Third, and this is crucial, they separate Olga's vengeance from her Christianity. The revenge happens before her conversion, when she's still pagan, still operating under pagan moral frameworks. The hagiographies suggest that after her baptism, Olga becomes a different person. Gentler, more merciful, more Christian. This is historically nonsense. Olga's conversion happens around 957. The Drevlian campaign happens in 945 and 946, but chronology is flexible in hagiography. The narrative requires that pagan Olga be vengeful and Christian Olga be holy, so that's how it's told. the canonization titles her as equal to the apostles, one of the highest honors in Orthodox sainthood. It's a title given to rulers who spread Christianity through their political authority. Constantine the Great has this title. Vladimir will have this title. Olga has this title not because she was personally holy in the way that martyrs or ascetics are holy, but because she was politically crucial to Christianity's establishment in Rus. She's a political saint, a saint whose sanctity derives from historical importance rather than personal virtue. The Orthodox Church canonizes her because rejecting her would mean rejecting a critical piece of their own foundation narrative. If Olga isn't a saint, then the story of Christianity coming to Rus becomes more complicated, less divinely ordained, more human and messy. So they canonize her, and then they spend centuries trying to make sense of what they've done. Medieval icons of Saint Olga depict her in royal Byzantine regalia, holding a church, looking serene and pious. There's no hint of the violence, no suggestion of the burning city. Later artistic traditions sometimes include subtle references, a sword, a city in flames in the distant background, but always positioned as past sins overcome through faith. The feast day of Saint Olga, July 11th, in the Orthodox calendar, is celebrated with liturgies that focus on her role bringing Christianity to Rus. The hymns praise her wisdom, her faithfulness, her devotion. They mention her challenges and her victories in the vaguest possible terms. You could attend services on her feast day and never know about the buried embassies or the bathhouse burning. But here's what's remarkable. The Russian people never forgot. Folk traditions preserve the darker Olga alongside the saintly one. Oral histories, songs and tales, passed down through generations, remembered her not as a gentle grandmother, but as a terrifying force of nature. A woman who should never be crossed, a ruler who understood power in its rawest, most brutal form. These folk traditions exist in tension with the Church's sanitized version, and that tension reveals something profound about Olga's legacy. She contains multitudes. She's the pious Christian and the merciless avenger. She's the state builder and the city burner. She's the diplomatic negotiator and the orchestrator of massacres. She's all of these things simultaneously, and trying to reduce her to any single aspect misses the point. The question isn't whether Olga was good or evil. Those categories are too simple for a 10th century ruler operating in a world where violence was a political tool and where Christian morality coexisted comfortably with actions that would horrify modern Christians. The question is what Olga understood about power that most of her contemporaries didn't. She understood that power requires both fear and legitimacy. The Drevlian vengeance created fear. The administrative reforms created legitimacy. The conversion to Christianity provided a framework for future legitimacy. All of these elements were necessary. Remove any one of them and her regency fails. She understood that being a woman ruler in a patriarchal world required being twice as competent and 10 times as ruthless as any male counterpart. She couldn't afford to be merciful because mercy would be interpreted as weakness. She couldn't afford to hesitate because hesitation would invite challenges. She had to be absolutely certain in her actions and absolutely devastating in her responses to defiance. She understood that building a state requires thinking beyond your own lifetime. The administrative systems she created outlasted her. The diplomatic relationships she cultivated bore fruit under her successors. The religious infrastructure she established became the foundation of Russian orthodoxy. She wasn't just ruling for today, she was building for generations. And perhaps most importantly, she understood that history is written by the survivors. She ensured that she and her line survived. The Drevlians didn't. Their version of events, their grievances, their perspective, all of it died in the flames of Iskorosten. Only Olga's version remains, recorded in chronicles, celebrated in churches, passed down through the ages. This is how you become a saint despite burning cities. You win so completely that you control the narrative. You build systems that your successors depend on. You position yourself as indispensable to the story of how a nation came to be. And you live long enough to see your enemies erased from history while you're inscribed into it. Modern Russia, or rather the various successor states of Kiev, has a complicated relationship with Olga. In Ukraine, where Kiev is now Kyiv, Olga is celebrated as a foundational figure of Ukrainian identity. There are monuments to her in Kyiv, streets named after her. She appears on currency and stamps. She's claimed as a Ukrainian saint, a Kievian ruler, distinct from later Russian imperialism. In Russia, Olga is celebrated as the grandmother of Russian Orthodoxy, as the wise ruler who brought Christian civilization to the Rus lands, as a saint whose intercession is sought for protection and guidance. There are churches dedicated to her across Russia, icons of her in nearly every Orthodox community. Both claims have historical validity, and both are politically motivated. Olga ruled from Kiev, which is now in Ukraine, but she ruled over territories that included what's now Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. She's part of a shared medieval heritage that modern nations claim selectively, emphasizing the parts that support their current political narratives while downplaying the parts that don't. What's often lost in these nationalist appropriations is the sheer strangeness of Olga herself. She doesn't fit comfortably into modern categories. She's not a feminist icon in any contemporary sense. She used violence and political maneuvering, not social reform, to achieve power. She's not a traditional religious figure. Her sainthood is awkward and politically motivated. She's not a national hero in the straightforward sense. Her loyalty was to dynasty and state, not to any ethnic or national identity. She's something older and stranger, a 10th century ruler operating according to 10th century logic. A woman who played the game of medieval politics with exceptional skill and who understood that in her world power flowed from the sword, the treaty, and the story you told about both. The stories told about Olga have changed over the centuries. Medieval chroniclers presented her as an exemplar of proper vengeance and Christian conversion. 19th century Romantic nationalists portrayed her as a symbol of Slavic strength and resistance to foreign domination. Soviet historians, uncomfortable with her religious significance but unable to ignore her historical importance, emphasized her administrative reforms while downplaying both the violence and the Christianity. Post-Soviet Ukraine and Russia have reclaimed her as a religious and national symbol. Though they disagree about what nation she symbolizes, each era rewrites Olga to serve its needs. Each generation finds in her story whatever it's looking for: the avenger, the administrator, the saint, the state builder, the Christian, the warrior. She's all of these and none of these, simultaneously historical figure and cultural mirror. But beneath all the layers of interpretation, beneath the hagiography and the nationalism and the sanitization, there's a historical woman, born around 910, married to Igor of Kiev, widowed in 945, regent until approximately 960, died in 969. What did she think about what she'd done? The chronicles don't tell us. We have no personal writings from Olga. No letters, no diary entries, no private thoughts recorded. Everything we know comes from chroniclers who wrote decades or centuries after her death, who had their own agendas, who were more interested in moral lessons than psychological portraits. Did she regret Iskorosten? Did she lie awake remembering the screams of men buried alive? Did she have nightmares about the burning city? Or did she sleep peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she'd done what was necessary to protect her son's inheritance and establish her authority? We don't know. We can't know. The interior life of a 10th century ruler is lost to us, buried as thoroughly as those first Drevlian ambassadors. What we do know is that she ruled effectively for over 20 years, that she transformed Kievan Rus from a Viking raiding operation into a functioning state, that she established systems that outlasted her, that she positioned Christianity to eventually become the dominant religion of Rus territories, that she's remembered, celebrated, and canonized more than 1,000 years after her death. We know that she understood something fundamental about power in the medieval world, that it requires both violence and administration, that you must be feared and respected, that you must think in generations, not just years, that you must control the narrative as completely as you control the territory, and we know that she succeeded. Against enormous odds, in a world designed to exclude women from power, facing enemies who thought a widow would be easy to manipulate or destroy, Olga not only survived but thrived. She didn't just hold power for her son, she expanded it. She didn't just maintain the status quo, she transformed it. The woman who ordered men buried alive became a saint. The woman who burned a city became the grandmother of a nation's faith. The woman who orchestrated massacres became revered as wise and holy. History is strange. Power is strange. And Olga, Saint Olga, the warrior regent of Kiev, the burner of cities, the converter to Christianity, the administrative reformer, the diplomatic genius, the merciless avenger, is perhaps the strangest of all. On July 11th every year, Orthodox Christians across Eastern Europe light candles and say prayers to Saint Olga. They ask for her intercession, they praise her wisdom and her faithfulness. They celebrate her as equal to the apostles, and somewhere, perhaps, in whatever afterlife awaits those who burn cities and build churches, in equal measure, Olga watches and smiles. Because she won. Completely, absolutely. The Drevlians are forgotten. Prince Marl is a footnote. Iskorosten is ash. But Olga endures. Saint Olga. The queen who buried ambassadors and was buried in glory. The regent who burned a city and built a faith. The woman who understood that in the medieval world, and perhaps in any world, power belongs to those willing to take it and ruthless enough to keep it. Her walls may have crumbled, her churches may have been rebuilt, her administrative systems may have evolved beyond recognition, but her story remains, passed down through chronicles and icons and feast days and folk songs, remembered by historians and faithful alike, celebrated and condemned, sanitized and glorified, claimed and reclaimed. The story of Saint Olga of Kiev, the warrior queen who proved that vengeance and sanctity, brutality and brilliance, violence and vision are not opposites but two sides of the same coin. The coin that reads power on one side and legacy on the other. And that legacy, built on the ashes of Iskorosten and the foundations of a dozen churches, endures still. 1,055 years after her death, 1,000 years after her canonization, enduring because she made it impossible to forget her, because she wrote herself into history with fire and faith, because she understood that to be remembered you must be remarkable. And remarkable she was, Saint Olga of Kiev. Remember her name. If you stayed with this story from the burning birds of Iskorosten to the canonization debates of the 13th century, you're exactly the kind of history lover this channel was made for. We're here at Mementos Historians because we believe that the most powerful stories in history are the ones that challenge everything we think we know about the past, the ones that refuse to be simple, the ones that force us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, morality, and what it means to be remembered. St. Olga's story is one of the most complicated, most fascinating, most absolutely wild narratives in medieval European history, and yet most people have never heard of her. She's been buried under centuries of hagiography, erased from mainstream historical consciousness, reduced to a footnote in discussions of Christianization. That ends now, with you. Because you watched this story all the way through, you engaged with the complexity. You didn't look away when it got dark or uncomfortable. You stuck with Olga from the moment she stood over those Drevlian ambassadors to the moment she was lifted onto an altar as a saint. Share this story. Tell someone about the warrior queen who burned cities and built churches. Post about her. Make her impossible to ignore, because stories like Olga's only survive when people refuse to let them be forgotten. Hit that subscribe button and join a community dedicated to uncovering the historical figures who should be as famous as any European king or ancient conqueror. Turn on notifications because we're just getting started. There are so many more stories like this waiting to be told. Warriors and rulers and geniuses and monsters who shaped our world but whose names have been lost to time. Until next time, remember, history isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to remember and what we choose to tell. Saint Olga made sure her story would be told. Now it's our turn to make sure it's heard.